Today I'm going to give you the ultimate guide to choosing the right mid-bunk fifth wheel. Now when I use the word ultimate, might be a little bit biased, but I have been a mid-bunk owner for over 2 years now, and so I'm going to share what I've learned over the last 2 years of ownership. And I'm also going to go back in time before I bought the fifth wheel to some of the research that I did there. And really this video is all about tips and observations that I've made. And let me tell you, a lot of these are ones that RV salespeople will not tell you. They won't even mention these to you. So definitely stay tuned till the end of the video. Now, mid-bunks are very popular in the fifth wheel space because basically it's a rear living layout combined with a bunkhouse. So you get those great views out the back of your coach. You get the openness with the kitchen and the living space sort of combined, but sort of separate. And then you get that private sleeping space for your kids. In fact, some people actually use that as an office or multi-purpose type room. And that's what makes them so popular. You're going to see primarily my Jayco Pinnacle. This is the 37 MDQS in today's video. I'll also incorporate some other 3D virtual tours from some other brands just to demonstrate. But on that note, if you're interested in the 37 MDQS, I do plan to do a 2-year owner review, just an honest, candid 2-year owner review, probably over the next month. So definitely make sure you're subscribed. Okay, so with that, let's discuss these factors, choosing the right mid-bunk. And I'm gonna start with the door location going into the mid-bunk room. So you can see here we've got this beautiful rear living view right here, and then if we spin around, I'll try not to go too fast for you, then we've got an entry door going into the mid-bunk room. So this one is off the kitchen here in the 37 MDQS, and typically the only other option is to have a door right off your main hallway. So instead of having a little coat closet right here, you would have an entry door right here going into the mid-bunk. So again, you've got a door off the kitchen as one option, or a door off of your main hallway right here. So let's talk a little bit about those pros and cons. We'll first start with floor plans that have a door right off the main hallway here, almost directly across from the entry door. So obviously that's one thing to consider, is when that mid-bunk room is open, if the door is right here, you know, do you want that to be directly across from the entryway? It could be really handy if you're loading things in and able to go straight in. You know, it's going to have a door so you can shut it, but what if it's left open? Is that a concern for you? You know, so just something to think about right there. One major pro of having the entry door off your main hallway is that typically, most of the time, you're going to get more kitchen cabinets here in the kitchen, which, you know, in a mid-bunk floor plan, the kitchen is already a little bit more on the small and compact side, especially with upper cabinets. So if you have an entry door over here off the hallway, typically you're going to have a, you know, coffee bar or taco bar right here with upper and lower cabinets. So you definitely get a little bit larger kitchen. However, sometimes you get a little bit less storage space inside the mid-bunk room because that storage space ends up being out here in the kitchen. And then last concern I'll mention is if the entry door is right here to your mid-bunk, you know, directly across from your entry door to the RV, you just want to think about noise. Is it noisier in this position? You know, it's kind of in a hallway away from the living space, or is it noisier because people are walking through here and it's directly across from your entry door into the RV? You just got to weigh that, and that could be different for each person. Now let's kind of transition to exploring the pros and cons with the entry door off of the kitchen, and we'll start with the noise there. So again, this is right off the kitchen. So if everyone's going to be hanging out in this nice rear living space, then, you know, having the door right off the kitchen here, it might be noisier perhaps compared to having the door over there off the hallway. One obvious con of having the mid-bunk entry door off the kitchen is, of course, you're not going to have that wall of cabinets, that little coffee bar, taco bar right here. You're going to lose all that compared to if the entry door to the mid-bunk was down the hall. Speaking of which, being right off the kitchen here, another consideration is just congestion, because when you open that mid-bunk door, you can see you're right up there against the refrigerator. However, I will point out one major pro of having the entry door right off the kitchen here, and by the way, my slide is not pushed out all the way, it's got about another foot to go, But one major pro is that most floor plans, you're going to end up with an entire wall here of storage or a desk or cabinets, right? So you're typically going to have a little bit more storage if your mid-bunk entry is off of the kitchen like this. Not always, but most of the time. Next, let's talk about loft above or no loft. And this one is super important. This is something that RV salespeople typically don't talk about. And it has a lot to do with ceiling heights and overall heights inside the RV that can really make or break the functionality of having a loft or not having a loft. So, I mean, obviously, if you have a loft, that's extra sleeping space or maybe storage space for you. You know, it's just an extra space to put another body or two. Whereas if you don't have that, then everything's going to be inside this single room. All right, so check out these heights here. I do have to duck just a little bit to get through that doorway right there. I'm 6'2" and 5'8" tall. But check this out. Once I'm inside the room, I can stand up tall, and the top of my hat, I'm probably a little taller with the hat on, but the top of my hat is just barely touching the top of the ceiling here. And so it's almost like Jayco used someone 6'3" as a benchmark, you know, for this bunk room space. So this works if you're under 6'3". You can come in here and walk around, no issues. You just have to duck here with the entry door. But this is where a lot of manufacturers and floor plans get it wrong, up here in this loft space. In fact, I remember when I was looking at mid-bunk floor plans, I saw a lot of different tours online where this loft space looked great. And then I would go see it in person, and so many of them, this space was completely unusable because of the overall height here. So pay attention to this overall height. You know, Jayco does kind of these arched trusses on the roof setup here, and so there's over 24 inches of height here in the loft space. That is very suitable for most kids, probably even up to, you know, 10, 11, 12, depending on how tall and big they are. But definitely check that height, because there are so many floor plans that mess that up. They're only, you know, 18, maybe 20 inches tall. And it is so hard to get up in here. I mean, for me personally, if I can't myself get up into this loft space, and usually this is kind of the point of tension right here, getting over this lip. But if I can't myself get into this loft space, then I really don't think it's suitable, because, you know, what if I have to make a repair to the shade or to the cabinet? You know, who's going to do it if you can't fit in there? So definitely test that out, try it out. But I'm telling you, the height here is a big factor that a lot of RV salespeople and a lot of brands neglect and mess this up. And you know, really it's a balancing game that the manufacturers play with the overall ceiling height inside the fifth wheel. You know, basically they're putting some of that to the mid-bunk room and then some of that space to the loft above. And if you only have so much height here to begin with, it's really difficult to find that happy medium where you've got enough head height going into your mid-bunk and yet you still have enough height going up there in the loft. Which, speaking of which, that is why I think so many brands entirely skip the loft, is because they've built prototypes and they realize, hey, we don't have enough overall ceiling height inside the fifth wheel to put both a comfortable room and a loft above, and so they entirely skip that loft. And so that's another consideration to think about, is having a loft important? You know, can your kids fit in that loft to begin with, or is it just going to be storage? And if you don't care about that, then you may want a mid-bunk floor plan that forgoes that loft in favor of a larger mid-bunk room that goes all the way up to the ceiling. And you know, sometimes it can make a really big difference having that full ceiling height. You know, I'll show you again what it looks like in mine where it's split. And sometimes for some people it might feel a little bit tight in here. And so having the ceiling go all the way up, it's going to afford you a more open feel in this smaller space. Again, I've got my slide pushed in about a foot. It can go out more, but you're going to have a lot more space. It's going to feel more open and probably have more cabinets because it's taller like that. So you're going to get a little bit more storage if you forego that loft up there, and it's going to feel a little bit more open. So really it's a personal preference at the end of the day. You know, do you want to use this loft space for sleeping or storage, or would you rather have just a single room below with a taller ceiling height? But let's talk next about slide rooms, whether you should have a slide room in the mid-bunk room or no slide at all. And again, I've got the slide extended not quite all the way. It's got about another foot to go. But obviously the slide's going to give you a lot more space when the slide is out. I mean, you can see here, imagine it being pushed out another foot. It just feels very open in here. But one downside is when the slide is in, this room, this entry point, is completely not accessible. And so that is one consideration, that every time it's in travel mode, you can't get in here, you got to push it out to be able to get to that. Typically, I think most of the time, if you've got a kitchen entry into your mid-bunk room, you're going to have a slide. There are a few floor plans that I can think of that don't have a slide in the mid-bunk room, and most of them, I believe, are going to have that entry right across your entry door, kind of in this main hallway space. So it is nice if it doesn't have a slide room and you've got your entry door here, you know, it's fully accessible in travel mode. That's another consideration to think about. Well, next, let's talk about the furniture, the overall layout inside the actual mid-bunk room. And again, if you've got an entry off of the kitchen like I do here, then typically in the mid-bunk room, you're gonna have a wall full of cabinets, storage, a desk maybe incorporated into the layout, and then opposing that is gonna be your sleeping space or a couch. So let's look at that for a little bit here on the slide. So I've got a couch, a trifold couch that folds out here into about a double-sized bed. And then up above here, I've got some overhead cabinets and a nice window there. So every time we want to go into sleep mode, of course, we have to unfold the couch there. And then if we want to use it during the day as a couch, we've got to fold it back. So that's just a consideration compared to having a lower bunk here that's not a couch. That's just a fixed bunk, right? And then another consideration is going up above, some floor plans actually have another bunk, a second bunk up here that kind of flips up, tilts up out of the way. And so if you do that, that looks really handy. In fact, in the sister product, the North Point to the Pinnacle here, they actually have a second bunk up here that folds up out of the way. Now, on paper, that looks great, especially in 3D floor plans online, but think about that. That bunk is going to be probably right about here or so. So that looks okay maybe in a video, but it is very narrow right here in a very small sleeping space. So unless your child is, you know, 1, 2, 3 years old, I don't think you're going to be able to make use of a second bunk at this level. And remember, we've got another loft above, so this slide height is already shorter because it's got to fit inside of this ceiling height here. So that's another consideration. And then if you do have a flip up bunk here, that typically is going to block a window, because then this window gets pushed up a little bit, and then when that bunk is flipped up, you're really not going to have a lot of natural light in here. Of course, if you've got a bunk up above, you're not going to have this storage. So, you know, there's a give and take with everything, but just think through with the heights and everything involved. If there is a second bunk here, is it really usable? Compare it to a layout where you don't have a loft above, and so this slide ends up being a lot taller and higher. Then maybe having a second bunk up here makes a lot more sense because it's taller, you've got a lot more height. Then you just got to figure out a way to make it safe, you know, whether it's a railing or some kind of guard, you know, getting in and out of that second bunk up there. So again, there's a lot of give and take. You just got to think through what works best for your family. And again, try it out in person to see how does everything fit space-wise, especially with the heights. And then I'll also mention, for those of you who are interested in a mid-bunk from a multi-purpose space standpoint, or, you know, workspace for an office, then you want to pay attention to the overall layout. You know, first of all, does it have a desk where you can slide under comfortably with a chair? And does it have space for a monitor? You know, Jayco actually put this in here to begin with. I did have to upgrade it to a higher resolution, but the layout was here. You know, you've got this nice drawer right here, and I was able to easily modify this, check this out, into a folding keyboard tray. And so I can get my keyboard here, and I just feel a lot more productive when I've got a bigger monitor, you know, a keyboard and mouse and everything all spread out compared to working off a small laptop. So I really appreciate the way Jayco laid this out, but not every mid-bunk room or multi-purpose room has a nice desk layout like this that can kind of double as an office. Okay, next let's talk about, if you do have a loft space above, are you going to want a ladder here or a conventional set of stairs, you know, 3 or 4 stairs going up into the loft space? And I'll say that when I was looking at different floor plans, the majority that had a loft above, the majority are going to have a ladder just like this one. There's very few that actually have conventional stairs going up into the loft. And I remember being very concerned initially with, you know, how are my kids in the middle of the night, if they have to go to the bathroom and everything's dark, are they going to just tumble out of here and hit the floor, you know, wake everybody up? how are they going to figure out how to use that ladder safely? But I will say, after watching them, kids are very quick to learn things, and even younger kids can figure this ladder out. And I feel very, assured, even younger kids, 2-3 years old, can climb this easily, hop up into the loft space. And so really, I don't think that's as big of a deal as I thought it was originally. But I will say there are some nice floor plans that do have conventional steps, and it's definitely easier, I think, for adults, especially, to get up there. However, if you do have conventional steps going into that loft space up there, remember that is going to eat up into some of your storage. So if I had conventional stairs going up into the loft, I'd pretty much lose all of this storage here. I mean, you'd have like basically something that's angled, a cutout, to accommodate those stairs up above. So then you lose some storage down here. So in the end, ladder versus stairs, it's not as big of a deal as I thought it would be, but it really is a personal preference in the end, what you're most comfortable with. But let's talk next about the door, the type of door going into the mid bunk. You can see I've got a conventional hinge door right here. Compare that to a sliding barn door or a pocket door. And so one thing I really like about a hinge door like this one is that it seems to me that you've got more substantial isolation in terms of light and noise, the way that seals up tight around the door jamb. And so if you're concerned about, noise and light off of here, waking up your kids when they go to bed earlier, I think that hinge door really works out nicely. However, on the con side, you can see that it could create a bit of a traffic jam, because when that's open, you're not able to get into your refrigerator there. So that's just another consideration. I have seen floor plans, and I'll say probably the majority have sliding barn doors, whether the door's in this position here off the kitchen or in the hallway. In fact, I think in the hallway, you're almost always going to have some kind of sliding barn door. Maybe once in a while you'll have one that folds in, but it definitely seems like the barn doors are more popular. So you just got to decide, is that going to let too much light in, too much noise in? Is it going to get in the way compared to a conventional door that might cause a congestion problem in your kitchen? All right, this next one is huge. In fact, I would dare say this might be the single most important thing to consider with a mid-bunk floor plan. This is one that RV brands, RV salespeople definitely don't talk about, and it's something kind of like a surprise that you figure out after owning the unit, and that has to do with this up here, the cooling for the bunk room. And this is especially important if you live, in the south or somewhere where it gets hot and humid, and you want to make sure this bunk room is cool and comfortable, especially at nighttime if your kids are sleeping in here. And I have noticed that the vast majority of RV brands and their floor plans with mid bunks, the cooling is absolutely anemic for the bunk room. I mean, you will be tracking probably 4 to 6 degrees warmer in the mid bunk because the manufacturer does not plumb an adequate amount of airflow, CFM coming from the air conditioner. So this one is absolutely huge. I was fortunate enough to be able to modify here my Pinnacle and change the 4-inch duct that it came with into a 6-inch duct. It's almost triple the CFM, the airflow. And so that has solved my problem, at least here, keeping the bunk room, tracking with the rest of the coach. But I mean, basically, if you've got a bunk room about this size from a manufacturer and you only see one 4-inch duct, chances are it's going to get pretty hot in there. So that's another thing when you go look at these mid bunks on a dealer lot, ask them, hey, can we plug it in, crank the AC up, do it a couple hours before I arrive, and that way you can feel the difference in the mid bunk room. And I really think manufacturers need to think that through and engineer that better. And chances are in a space like this, I really think you need either 2 4-inch ducts and registers coming down into here or one larger 6-inch. So again, guys, this one is super important because you can have the most beautiful mid-bunk layout ever in the world, but if it's consistently warmer and hotter in the mid-bunk room, that can really make the camping trip, the vacation, rough. So definitely pay attention to that. And that, by the way, applies not just to mid-bunks that have a loft above, but even units that have that full ceiling height. I think it's trickier when you have that loft space above because then they're making a 90-degree turn on the ductwork and going down into the bunk room. And so that airflow is not as likely to make that 90-degree turn, right? But it still is an issue even in units that don't have a loft above. I really think even units that don't have a loft above should still have 2 separate vents up here on the ceiling to keep the mid-bunk room at the right temperature. Next, let's talk about noise. And I kind of alluded to this already with the position of the door going into the mid-bunk, you know, as far as the kitchen, living space being right off the entry door versus the door being in the hallway. And then you got noise maybe from outside or from that hallway bleeding into the mid-bunk. But let's talk about hidden noises, you know, noises you may not think about initially. For example, what if you've got a furnace blower on the opposite side of this wall here? Or what if you've got a furnace intake, right, with a grill, and then that blower is just right on the other side of that wall? And so every time the furnace kicks on in the winter months, that blower turns on and makes a lot of noise right here in the bunk room. Maybe your kids are sensitive to noises at night. Or what if you've got a noisy water pump that's behind this wall right here, and so your kids are hearing that, right? I mean, typically in most mid-bunk floor plans, your main bathroom is going to be basically on the other side of this wall, just higher up. So that's something really I think all mid-bunks are going to share. And there could be some noise, you know, if you're taking a shower or whatnot in there. But those hidden noises are things you just want to pay attention to. Figure out what is behind this wall in the mid-bunk. Is there anything that could be noisy that could wake up your kids? And maybe turn it on and just see how loud does it sound. If there is a furnace blower back there, which in mine there is, how loud is it? And so just test things out before you settle on a model. Know what you're getting into, basically. All right, I've got just a few more. Let's talk about windows. You know, I love how Jayco puts this nice big window up here in the loft space above. Really makes a difference. And then of course down here below in the actual mid-bunk room, you've got another nice big window letting lots of natural light in. But I remember looking at floor plans where there were no windows at all, not even here in the mid-bunk room, or they skipped the window up above there in the loft. And so pay attention to that, because having those extra windows can really let a lot of natural light in and just make something feel more spacious. In fact, if you don't have a loft above, I've even seen some manufacturers put two windows, you know, one down below, and then of course the slide is higher, and so they'll put a second one up above, and I really think that makes a big difference. Next, let's talk about cargo carrying capacity. And guys, this one is huge. This is another big one that RV salespeople and manufacturers do not talk enough about. All right, so in a mid-bunk floor plan, typically it's going to be suited for families, you know, family of 4, 5, 6, maybe you got 7 or 8 total, right? And so with all those extra bodies, you're going to have extra gear, right? Extra belongings that you're bringing along. And so cargo carrying capacity is how much can you add to the RV before it's overloaded on the axles or the pin box, you know, how the manufacturer rates it, okay? So when you've got more people, you're going to have more stuff, and you need to have ample cargo carrying capacity. And this is something that, again, salespeople and brands do not talk about. There were a lot of floor plans and models that I looked at that looked great on paper. They looked beautiful, but their cargo carrying capacity was severely anemic, to the point where it's almost impossible to imagine putting all your gear and stuff into the RV and being under that threshold. Now in my Pinnacle, I did a full video on the cargo carrying capacity. I think it is just a little bit on the anemic side, especially when you add in options. That's another big thing, because typically the CCC on a manufacturer website is going to be without options, kind of a base level. You add in a washer dryer, a generator, a third air conditioner, you know, stuff like that. It all adds weight that takes away from that cargo carrying capacity. So pay attention to that number. I've got a little over 1,500 pounds of cargo carrying capacity here in the Pinnacle. I would not do any less than that. I mean, I would shoot for around 2,000. They actually upped the gross vehicle weight rating of the Pinnacle in later model years, and so it does have closer now to 2,000 as mine is equipped. But I would shoot for, you know, 2,000, 2,500 pounds minimum cargo carrying capacity. I mean, especially if you're going to be living full time in the RV with all that stuff. You don't want to be in a situation where you have this beautiful RV, but you can't put your stuff in it. Last one, let's talk about safety and the mid-bunk floor plan. You know, I would venture to guess that the vast majority of mid-bunk buyers are, at least some point, they're going to have kids sleeping in the mid-bunk room with a door shut. And I have seen many floor plans of both bunkhouses and mid-bunk floor plans where they stuff the converter box, you know, with the 120 volt breakers and the 12 volt fuses in the mid-bunk room. And so you've got a closed door and your kids are in that room with access to that 120 volt power with the breakers and everything. And I just don't think that's prudent to do that. I mean, you can discipline your kids, you can tell them not to go in there, but they're kids. at the end of the day. So thankfully, Jayco was prudent, I believe, and they put everything out here outside in the pantry, and I think that's the way to go. Keep it out of the mid-bunk room. Don't put it in there. I think it's being lazy. But then think about other things. Are there other controls like a slide room control that's in here, you know, for your kids to accidentally bump or touch that could do something, right? And so thankfully, again, Jayco doesn't have any slide controls in here. Everything's done through the BM Pro system. But just think about safety. Is there anything in the mid-bunk room with a door shut that you wouldn't want your kids getting into? Okay, so those are my considerations for the ultimate mid-bunk guide, and that brings us to an interesting question, which is why does some manufacturers, you know, some floor plans get things right, and then other brands that just get things completely wrong when it comes to the mid-bunk layout? And I think a lot of it has to do with personal preferences. I mean, I think there are some objective, you know, this is better than that kind of stuff. But a lot of it at the end of the day, it's just your personal preference. Do you want a loft space above, or do you want no loft space above, right? And so it just comes down to how you plan to use it. You just want to think that through, right? And decide what is best for your family. But definitely go and see these mid-bunk floor plans in person. Don't rely on what you see on the tours, because you just don't get sometimes a perspective with heights. And I think those heights are really important for the mid-bunk layouts. I'll also point out that you can't have it all. And what do I mean by that? Well, you saw with the different considerations that I pointed out that when you move a door going into the mid-bunk from off of the kitchen here and you put it out in the hallway, there's a domino effect, right? I mean, there are real implications to moving things around in a mid-bunk floor plan. There's that give and take. And so you got to decide, you know, what is right for your family and the way that you plan to use that mid-bunk floor plan. Now, let me close the video by saying this. A lot of the different people that design mid-bunk floor plans and people in the RV industry, not always, but a lot of times, they don't actually use the product regularly. And so that's why you kind of end up with some of these features sometimes where you're scratching your head and going, why did they do this? Well, it's because they don't use it personally. Not always, but a lot of times. So to close out the video, I think it would be incredibly helpful if we all comment below and talk about, as a mid-bunk owner, what do you really like? What's really important to you as a mid-bunk owner in a mid-bunk floor plan? Maybe call out some brands that are doing an exceptional job and point out specifically, what do you like? You know, do you like that loft space above, or do you not like it? Would you rather just have a fully open mid-bunk room? So definitely comment below. I think the more comments we get, the better mid-bunk floor plans will become. As always, thanks for watching.